Welcome to this vodcast and podcast brought to you from the Australian National University's College of Asia and the Pacific in Canberra. My name is Nicholas Farrelly and I'm a research fellow in the college where I spend most of my time studying Southeast Asian politics. It's for that reason that it gives me great pleasure to welcome Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad, a rising star of the Malaysian political scene, here to the Australian National University today. Nik, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Nick.
So earlier in the year, in a series of interviews that I've done with various Malaysian political figures, and we'd certainly count you among that number, you're now one of Malaysia's youngest popularly elected representatives, I was talking to another prominent figure in the Malaysian political firmament, RPK, Rajapetra Kamarudin. And I ended my conversation with RPK by asking him, RPK, how would you like to be remembered? So I might start with that question to you, Nik Nazmi. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I think I would like to be remembered as someone who tries very hard to push Malaysia into new politics, which is not based on race, but based on values such as freedom, justice, equality. Someone who is able to work with a whole generation of young Malaysians who desire for the same thing. That's probably how I would like to be remembered.
You've already brought up young Malaysians, and you yourself are still relatively youthful. I understand you're only 29 years old, and you won't turn 30 until January next year.
Yeah.
A young politician, I suppose, has this entire future ahead of them. So many things to look forward to, so much potential. At least in a country like Malaysia, politics has probably in recent years been monopolised mostly by those in their 50s, their 60s or even their 70s. What's it like being considered one of Malaysia's young political guns? Is that a heavy burden to bear?
Well, it is to a certain extent, but I think it's not something that is new in Malaysian politics. When we first struggled for independence, the pioneers were the younger educated generations, both from the right and the left factions of Malaysian politics. And then in the 70s, it was the student activists who drove Malaysian politics, including people like Anwar Ibrahim. So it's not exactly unique in Malaysian history. But yes, the burden is huge in a way, and things are changing so rapidly today that at times probably there is a greater imperative for younger politicians to play a role because of technology, because of the Gen Y, because Malaysia being a relatively very young country. These things make it more important for young politicians to play an important role. So yes, in that sense, the burden is heavy indeed.
How do you use technology in your own work? Talk us through that.
Well, I'm very much wired up in a sense. I've been, I grew up with the internet. I had my own website since I was in school. I started writing on Malaysia Kini, which is an online website. And until today, I blog. I started being on Facebook relatively early, being on Twitter relatively early. So these things are the things that I use to reach out. And it's very useful, especially because of Malaysia's very much controlled mainstream media. As a way for me to reach out to other Malaysians, because the internet in Malaysia, fortunately, is relatively free.
It sounds like you're a bit of an early adopter, in a manner of speaking. And I suppose when I think of Australian political culture, I'm aware that a lot of those who get into politics from a young age tend to be very highly partisan. They'll be in the Young Labour movement or the Young Liberals, and at least on a university campus like that, there can even be a bit of stigma associated with being so young and so very enthusiastic about political matters. Were you any different?
The danger about young politicians is always that sometimes they do not have a life outside politics. I mean, career politicians, they start politics very early, and I'm probably one of them in that sense. But I had my radical episodes very early. When I was at school, I had my I had my Che Guevara moments when I was very much very super idealistic. I was but reformasi when Anwar Ibrahim was sacked in Malaysia was an eye opener for me. But I always was a realist in the sense that I wanted all these novel ideas to be able to be realized in real life. And I was a student in the UK for 3 years. I was active both in Malaysian societies but also in the Labour Party. I was active in the British Muslim students groups. So all these opportunities that I had were very instrumental in giving me perhaps in a sense a unique perspective when I came back from the UK in 2005 and got fully engaged in the Justice Party. So in that sense, so I as I say, I got my radical years over early.
Interesting. You've already reflected on your time in London, and as I understand it, you're a student at King's College there, where you studied law. Are those good memories for you?
Well, I hardly studied. It was good. It was a good time to be in London at that time. It was the Iraq War was there, so I think that was the first time British Muslims joined the British population in general in a joint political cause that was not sectarian, and that showed that had a lot of lessons for someone like me who tries to both be a good Muslim and try to be a social democrat, because that it's not uniquely that Muslim politicians can fight not just Muslim causes but causes which are universal. And in Malaysia, which is a very diverse country, Muslim at the same time with a strong non-Muslim component, is something, the lessons are real. So I think those are very valuable lessons. At the same time, these were the new Labour years. And I mean, what was very interesting to me, having had my idealistic years, was that how New Labour became a party, how Gordon Brown and Tony Blair made Labour into a party that could win elections. That to me meant a lot because the opposition in Malaysia historically has never managed to take over power. So those were useful lessons. Of course, I say that with a lot of caution because of what happened eventually. But I think those are still useful lessons for politicians in general.
I assume that some of the other lessons that you picked up when you were in the UK focused on your legal studies and in particular your exposure to certain ways of thinking about law. Any Australians who are watching this vodcast or listening to the podcast will know that within our politics here, there's perhaps an over-representation of lawyers in our parliaments, not just at the federal level, but at every level in this country. Do you think that lawyers often make good politicians?
Well, I think, because under the Westminster system, is the MPs are the legislators. And they also end up as the Prime Minister or the ministers. So whether we like it or not, people who do law have an added advantage compared to people who do other forms of studies, in the sense that you're already exposed to the law. I mean, since the job is lawmaking. But I mean, I guess I wasn't that good of a law student, I have to admit, but generally, I mean, a law student would be trained in being persuasive with his arguments, in being able to argue on both sides of the fence, in being very detailed in going through legislation. So these are things which are all useful values for politicians, and I think even in Malaysia, we have that over-representation of lawyers in the political system.
Is that healthy?
Well, I think that it doesn't hurt to have more variety, definitely. And I think we do need to have different viewpoints included. But, you can't have a quota, I guess, to discourage lawyers to join politics. But, I mean, I think it is a part of the nature of things.
I'm sure. So, changing tack a bit now, Nik Nazmi, if you don't mind, our Australian government has just embarked on a process of writing a new white paper, focused in particular on Australia's engagement with Asia during this looming Asian century. I'd really like to get your impressions about that, and in particular, how does that sound to your ears? Does it sound reasonable that Australia would be preparing such a white paper? Does this sound like a good idea to you?
Well, I think there is no other way, I guess. There is no other option, both for Asia and for Australia, but to work together because of the proximity. I mean, we might be in a very connected day and age, but at the end of the day, geography still matters. And Australia, although culturally and historically has been seen as a Western country as opposed to an Asian country, but you know, as time goes by, it's no longer sustainable. I mean, and with the changing demographic in Australia, it makes sense for Australia to work closely with Asia. I mean, it's, for me, someone who spent a lot of time in the UK, it's remarkable about how Asian Australia is compared to the UK, although there's a lot of Asians there. Food, culture, people. So I think it's reasonable for the government to do that, and I think it's something fruitful for the region, for ASEAN, for Asia as a whole, and to work together with Australia.
So as a Malaysian politician, and as somebody who will likely be in this business for many, many years to come, so many years into the future that this white paper will become ancient history, what sorts of things do you think would be important for Australia to be emphasising beyond some of those more superficial assessments of our demography and all the rest? Are there other elements that would really matter for a country like Malaysia and for Malaysians like yourself?
Well, I think, I mean, I think you know, one of the strengths that Australia has, being a developed country with an excellent education system and all that. In that sense, I mean, you know, it would be useful for Australia to share. I mean, of course, Australia has shared a lot of these things with the region, but to continue to do so, because I think there is an eagerness. Malaysia has always been, you know, open to Western education, but there are other countries now opening up. Indonesia, Vietnam, where there's a huge thirst for English education, where Australia can play an important role. And I think at the same time, I mean, China is a growing power and all that, and I think Australia needs to engage with China. There's a lot of immigrant Chinese population in Australia, and just like there is in Malaysia, and there needs to be an engagement with China as well. So I think those things need to be focused upon. And I think rather than seeing us as competitors, I mean, we need to find ways to work with one another. Let's face it, the similarity that Australia and Malaysia has is that in terms of numbers, it's two small countries in terms of population. Of course, Australia is blessed with a huge landmass. But let's face it, Indonesia, China, India, Vietnam, Philippines, those are big countries. So both, well, Australia is doing well, but Malaysia needs to catch up. But we need to find areas where we can focus on to build on the strength of Asia, rather than, you know, sort of focusing on the lowest common denominator, because that is not good for everyone.
So you've already mentioned this notion that we should be working together more, and in recent months one of the areas where the Australian and Malaysian governments have been endeavouring to work together is of course around some kind of asylum seeker deal, which certainly, as you know, has been a preoccupation of Australian politicians for many, many years now. When we turn our attention to that set of negotiations from a Malaysian perspective, does it look like it's been well managed or well negotiated or well handled?
I've spoken to a lot of those involved in civil society, those who have been working with refugees, with asylum seekers in Malaysia, and I think the concern is Malaysia not being a signatory of the UN Convention on Refugees. That is a matter of concern. I mean, to be fair, I mean, I wouldn't want to, just reinforce the stereotype, but there are serious human rights concerns, not just for foreigners, but even for Malaysians in Malaysia. And that is a valid point, no matter how sensitive it seems for some Malaysians. So I think that at the end of the day, this problem will always be there. I mean, it's not going to disappear anytime soon. It's definitely a problem of human rights, and we need to work not just between Australia and Malaysia, but on a regional basis. There's been, the understanding from Bali about the region working together. I think that is a more fruitful approach to manage the problem. I wouldn't say solve, but at least to manage the problem, to find both a solution that is acceptable on a human rights perspective for the asylum seekers and refugees, but also for the host countries, which understandably has valid concerns.
So in recent months, as these debates have been swirling around in Australian society, there have been all sorts of really quite harsh and negative things said about Malaysia and its system and its approach to issues like refugees. I suppose I've got a young and very much rising Malaysian politician in the hot seat here today. Can you tell us what are the very best things about Malaysian society?
Well, Malaysian society is by nature, for the past, I think for the past 500 years or more, has always been a very diverse society. So, although there are issues from it that we need to overcome, but in a way we have also gotten used to diversity in ways where people in Indonesia or Thailand, for example, have not, in terms of multiculturalism. The Chinese in Indonesia or Thailand struggled to even learn their mother tongue, whereas in Malaysia the government continues to fund Chinese schools. Of course, there are other issues, I'm not denying, but in that sense we are more naturally multicultural in that sense. And I think in the 21st century, in the days of Facebook and Twitter, we should be embracing it rather than be talking about just one sort of a one size fits all state. That's a good thing about Malaysia, which I think has a lot of is valuable to other countries in the world today, which are dealing with diversity. Malaysia continues to place a lot of emphasis on religion. Of course, again, it's not always easy, it's not always positive, but I think there are positive values. I'm not just talking about Muslims. You meet a Christian, a Buddhist, a Hindu in Malaysia, people are generally more religious than they are in the Western world. And I think that there are good lessons from that. So family values, for example, not talking about the Mahathir or Lee Kuan Yew thesis, but just general, the family institution is seen as more sacred in Malaysia and I think a lot of Asian societies. So these things are valuable, I think, lessons that the world as a whole can benefit from.
So one of the slogans that often gets associated with that is Malaysia, truly Asia, right?
Yeah.
Smart marketing, or is there something deeper that we need to understand about Malaysia that comes from that style of slogan?
Well, it was a tourism slogan, but I think there is a value to it. I mean, there's a real lesson from it in the sense that Malaysia truly has everything that Asia has to offer in a way. We've been open to Arabs, to Indians, to Persians, to Chinese, to Indonesians for thousands of years. And we can't afford. I mean, Australia probably can talk about not accepting people and all that, but Malaysia is at the center of things. It's at the tip of Asia. It's at the crossroads of trade. It's where the monsoons meet. So we have no choice but to be embracing the world. We are by nature a very open country in a sense. We can't close our doors. So yes, I mean, I think Malaysia is in that sense truly Asia. Yeah.
So those who've been watching and listening to this recording, they will by now already appreciate that when it comes to communications, you've got a lot going for you, right? And others have no doubt identified this, and even though you are relatively youthful, you've been tapped on the shoulder and given some high responsibilities when it comes to communications within your own political party. Indeed, this is a huge responsibility. What's the hardest part of doing that job well?
Well, lack of resources in a way. I mean, I think my title sounds very grand, but I don't have the resources that Peter Mandelson or Alistair Campbell had in the UK with the Labour Party. But I think that's a challenge. And in Malaysia, whether we like it or not, yes, the digital age has opened a lot of doors in a way, and because the opposing side, in spite of the expensive consultants and all that, has not totally figured it out. but doesn't make it easy because digital media still goes just to a certain extent. We still need to reach out those who are on the other side of the digital divide. We still need, Malaysia is again a very diverse country where you need to, at least in order to reach out, you have to be able to be fluent not just in Malay, the national language, in English, which is the language of business, but also in Mandarin, in Tamil, and the language Kadazan and Iban in Sabah and Sarawak. So in that sense, I mean, with the lack of resources, the hurdles that you face from the governing party and the laws, outdated laws and all that, it's not an easy job to do it. And at the end of the day, politics is about communication, because you want to reach out to as many people as possible in order to get them to support you. So that is the challenge I face in doing my job.
I'm just curious there, on the language front, clearly you speak perfect English and I'd assume perfect Malay. Do you speak any of Malaysia's other languages too? Or
No.
do you dabble?
No. Well, I as politicians, the one or two phrases that you need to use before any rally just to get people excited. But no. Unfortunately, I tried learning other languages. Well, not the Malaysian languages, but I think God has made me to only be fluent in 2 languages.
Okay, which is no bad thing. All right, the next question is about the leader of your party, Anwar Ibrahim. He's a seriously big deal in Malaysian politics. Too big?
Well, I think, Anwar Ibrahim has a lot of strengths. I mean, people tend to not notice them. I mean, first, the tenacity to be in politics in spite of everything being thrown at him. I mean, you talk about Bill Clinton being the comeback kid. I don't know whether Bill Clinton can survive Malaysian politics. What Anwar has faced. Of course, he was Deputy Prime Minister. But following that, the first trial, the imprisonment, any other person would probably then be happy to just retire overseas with his family, lead a quiet life. But no, Anwar Ibrahim made a point to continue to lead the multiracial party that he gave birth to, in a sense. And it was a new model of politics. He did not try the old model of race-based or class-based or religion-based politics, but something which is truly centrist, truly multiracial, truly Malaysian in this sense. And no one gave him a lot of credit at that time until it succeeded. And then he faced a second trial. And he's a much older man today. But the energy, that tenacity, and the ability, again, which people forget. People call him a chameleon. But no, I disagree, because Malaysia is very diverse. Anwar Ibrahim is able to bridge the gap between the West and the East, between the religious scholars who are only fluent in Malay and Arabic in the traditional madrasas in Kelantan, and the urban KL elites who are more used to following Western or British news rather than Malaysian news. He is able to be the bridge. So in that sense, yes, he is. Well, that's why people keep asking what comes next after Anwar. But you always, sometimes, when you have a big tree, you can't see the other smaller trees that are in the shadows. I mean, that is the other side to it. But let's face it. I think Anwar Ibrahim has contributed a lot to Malaysian politics, a lot to the change over the past 10 years. I'm not going before that, which he has contributed a lot as well. And but as far as I'm concerned, since Reformasi and beyond, this new paradigm of politics, Anwar Ibrahim has played an important role. His energy. I'm 29. He campaigns. He can speak at 5 constituencies every night during the election campaign period. I can't do that. I don't think I can do that. Or probably then I will probably the next day I'll drop dead. But he does that every single night, and that shows. That shows how special he is in Malaysian politics.
So Nik Nazmi, you've reflected already on some of the scandals that have swirled around Anwar Ibrahim's career. And these, of course, are very well known outside the country, and they've been something of a defining issue for him and his politics over the last many years. And I noted that in some of the issues and allegations that have arisen in recent times, in particular earlier this year when there was one video doing the rounds and all kinds of talk about it, you were one of the people out there having to defend him. What was that like?
Well, when it first came, when he first faced his first trial in 1998, I knew him just as a distant political figure. But this time around, the second allegation which he faced, and now the other sex video, I've worked with him. I was his private secretary from 2006 to 2008. I worked closely with him. And you get a better sense of the person once you work with him. And I know for a fact that it's not true. I that's why, the videos that were the alleged video of Anwar Ibrahim, anyone who knows Anwar knows that it's not him. But of course, for the general public that do not know him closely, then they may not be able to tell the difference. So that's why it's unfortunate again that Malaysian politics is being brought down to that level. But I think that's the whole point, because Anwar's potential, immense potential in Malaysian politics, that really scares his opponents, that they cannot deal with him like they deal with any other political leader. It makes Malaysian politics worse, but we just have to continue and the struggle. I mean that is the simple message for us, I guess.
So you've said that it's a pity that Malaysian politics gets so caught up in these issues, alleged sexual indiscretions and all the rest. Is that something that's ever going to change?
Well, across the world, sex sells. It's not just in Malaysia, but I think there is a greater desire for people to be talking about issues, because the more time, I'm not saying, I think I want my leader to be moral. I think maybe that's a distinction. I know that even in Malaysia there are those who are very liberal and say, I don't care what my leader does privately. Malaysians still care. That's a fact. Most Malaysians still care. But at the same time, the more the more we spend our time talking about these false allegations or whatever, we spend less time talking about building better schools, about what's the best energy policy for the country, what's the best way to get Malaysians abroad to come back home. Column inches are being wasted debating these things, either attacking or defending these things, and not talking about the substantive challenges that Malaysia has to face. So I think that is what we need to grapple with, and that's where we need to go to, so that we should spend less time with the scandals and spend more time on the real issues that make a difference on many lives in Malaysia.
Nik Nazmi, we are almost out of time for today, but before we do wrap up, I have one final question. And at least in Australia, if you get into active party politics, there's probably at least one small part of your ambition focused on perhaps one day, if everything goes right and according to plan, perhaps becoming Prime Minister of your country, right? Okay. You're sitting here, you're 29 years old. I'm sure that if this ever does happen, it's many years in the future. But do you first of all harbour the ambition to perhaps one day be the Prime Minister of Malaysia? And more than that, I suppose, if you were in such a fortunate position, what would you do with your first 100 days? What are the things you'd really like to make happen in the Malaysia of that future?
Well, everyone goes into politics with some ambition, definitely. But I have been warned that in Malaysia there's been so many victims of politics. Bright young men who are being said to have a lot of future ahead of them, who end up by the roadside of politics because of how vicious Malaysian politics is. And it is like a roller coaster ride, literally. Having said that, I think a new Malaysia, regardless of who leads it, that I want to see is a Malaysia that is able to look at its diverse heritage positively, not as a bad thing, not as something to be ashamed with or something to sweep under the carpet, but something to be embraced, and to be able to be comfortable with itself. Again, not necessarily in the Western sense of just being another liberal democratic country. Of course, that's good. I'm all for democracy and all that. But what I'm saying is that also it should be at peace with its religious heritage, its diverse racial heritage, cultural heritage, and all that. And a Malaysia that starts to talk. Again, I'm not saying that race does not matter or religion does not matter. I am very cognizant of the fact that it will continue to matter, especially in Malaysia. But as I said, spending more time talking about, whatever it is, at least Australia is debating about immigration and about carbon tax and all that, which I think is more substantive, which affects all Australians, as opposed to Malaysia, which race gets what, who gets killed in prison, you know, which is to me demeaning to politics, and at the end of the day turns a lot of people off politics. That is the Malaysia that I would like to see in the future.
Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad, we'll have to leave it there for today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you. That is, I'm afraid, all we'll have time for. For those of you out there listening and watching this vodcast and podcast, brought to you from the Australian National University's College of Asia and the Pacific in Canberra. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to get to know Nik Nazmi in so many of his different facets. It's been a real pleasure for me to have this opportunity to interview you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to those of you at home, best wishes to all.